Hey, it's Andy at Content Cal here. Welcome to this session on the metrics that matter. This is all about helping you to build a confidence-inspiring content strategy that's led with data and driven by a true understanding of the things that will drive results, whatever results look like for you. We're going to go through 6 things in this session today. Firstly, we're going to start with some social media myths and bust a few of the things that you typically might have heard. Then we'll look at the 6 golden rules of social media, really looking at the kind of polar opposite to this. Which are the things that are non-changing, the things that we can rely on, the things that will remain consistent across all of our social media efforts. Then we're going to look at some organic benchmarks. So let's look at the landscape today and see the state of social media and see where our opportunities lie. Then we're going to go into 6 steps to become more data-driven, how we can use the information around us to inform our content strategy. Then we'll talk about the metric that really matters, and I'll have to kind of control myself because I get really nerdy about this one. It's not a complex metric, but it is criminally underutilized in our space, and we absolutely need to understand it as far as we're concerned, or as far as I'm concerned, for us as marketers. And then we'll talk about ROI, because we're going to talk a lot about data, but of course there's always that sticky subject of ROI and proving social media's worth to others around you, be it your clients, be it the leadership teams of a business. Fundamentally, that you're probably on this session that you already know the impact and the transformational power that social media has, but sometimes telling the story to others can be challenging. So hopefully this will help. At the end of this session, which should be really practical, go into a lot of detail, you will have a hugely rounded perspective on what data means in social media and how we can use it to tell the best possible story. Because let's be honest, data means nothing without a story. Let's start here and bust some myths, shall we? And here's another statistic I've just made up, actually, because fundamentally, one of the challenges that face us all in the world of social is that how do we know what is true and what is not? Because it's not always with malice or bad intentions that incorrect information is shared. Fundamentally, social media is an inherently and fundamentally personal experience whereby creators and consumers of content have a uniquely and profoundly different experience depending on who they follow, the state of their applications, because not everyone is using exactly the same version of Instagram, for example. It's so profoundly different. It makes it very difficult for anyone to objectively say, we need to use 20 hashtags or 14 hashtags, or we need to post on this platform or this platform. All of that is very hard to hold on to because it's all personal experience. So the kind of call to action here is be curious. Rid yourselves of thinking that everything is fact, because it's not. Because the reality is we just need to stay curious and have a mindset of experimentation. That is the thing that will stand us in the best possible stead. Because we need to make sure we hook into these 6 fundamental laws of social media as I see them. These are the unchanging pillars of social media, where there'll always be things that shift, like Reels or TikTok or 3-minute videos versus 30-second videos or 3-second videos or lives or carousels. All of that will always change. Platforms will always change. But if we think in a first principles mindset, where we know the governing rules that orientate all of social media and all of business on social, this will stand us in a really good stead for helping us understand what data, what information do we really need to care about? Because if we build a strategy around these 6 things, we're going to be in a really good place. And we'll go through them one by one now. Firstly, scaling word of mouth is our ultimate ambition. Ultimately, as we know, there is no marketing channel like word of mouth for growing a business efficiently and effectively. Fundamentally, the words that people say about your business, whether you're for profit or non-profit, will mean more than anything you can express as a business. Our job is to light a fire under word of mouth, and nothing allows that fire to spread quite like social media. Then point 2, collaboration increases opportunity. As it does in any form of work or life, business, whatever, the more people we work with, the more opportunities we have to put content in other people's feeds. Look for people you can work with in your industry. Look at respected people you can work with. And it doesn't always mean paying an influencer to post about you. It means what's the value exchange you can find between other influential individuals and respected individuals in your space that you can create content with. When you create content together, you create better content, you create richer and more diverse content, and it's content that will end up in more people's feeds because those you collaborate with will also share that content. 3, participation increases engagement. People don't care about brands, they care about themselves fundamentally. So we need to give them a reason to care. We give people a reason to care by encouraging them to contribute or participate on our content. That might be involving them in viral trends that we might be working on, using like the add yours sticker on Instagram stories, for example, or using newer features like duets or remixes, for example. It might just be using polls, which seem eminently very popular on LinkedIn at the moment. Or it just might be asking people for their thoughts or, tag someone that they think has done great things. Give people a reason to care. People want to participate, so give them a reason to. The more people that participate, the better engagement your content gets. Because if there's one fundamental rule that guides all of the social media channels that will not change, or at least I can't see it changing anyway, is that engagement drives reach. The more people that engage with your content, the more people that are going to see your content. Sometimes I don't think this is known clearly enough by people who create social media content. Your content will only be shown to an ever decreasing pool of people. You might have 2,000 followers or 100,000, but the people that will see your content and the percentage of people who see your content gets smaller and smaller with every passing month. The decline of organic reach, as it's called, is real. And there's nothing we can do to avert that fundamentally. There are things we can do to find a way around it. So even though the platforms want to quash organic reach because fundamentally they want to sell more ad inventory, we know that, but organic reach is still there for those and there for the taking for those that either use the formats or the platforms correctly or leverage the best possible opportunities. And when I say leveraging opportunities, I'm meaning getting people to engage in your content will ensure your content goes as far and as wide as possible. So that's point 4, engagement driving reach. Point 5, reach drives awareness, because reach is essentially the amount of unique people that see your content. So how far your content goes, because the more people that see your content, the more people that become aware of you. There's a well-known rule in marketing called the rule of 7, which dictates that people need to see your content 7 times before they become cognitively aware of that. So encouraging that to happen, increasing your frequency, getting more people to see your content at a bigger scale drives more awareness. And awareness, sometimes we forget what it actually means because we just see it in like a marketing funnel and just go, oh, awareness. We all think we know what it means, but actually the real thing we're trying to do is maximize this marketing term, which is called maximizing mental availability, which what that means in simple terms is we want to be the product or service or, whatever it is that we do or tool that comes first to mind when a customer has a problem. Who do we turn to? What do we use when we know we've got a problem? And that's what is maximizing mental availability. And this is a really important point to make in point 6. In most people's eyes, the best product is the one they know. It's not always about having the most features or, being the cheapest or whatever. It's typically the one that comes to mind is what people deem as the best product, the one that they've got recognition of. Fundamentally, that's what a brand is all about. A brand is all about maximizing that mental availability. So these are the 6 pillars that fundamentally should guide everything that we do in the world of social. Let's now take a quick look into the social media landscape because it's ever changing. So now we know some fundamental principles. Let's look at where we sit today. Fundamentally, social media is on an incredible growth trajectory at the moment, as we know, where we've seen another year of double-digit growth, so 10% year-on-year growth, where now 4.6 billion people, or 58% of the world's population, log into social media every single month to check their news feeds. Now, 58% of the world's population all connected on one medium, absolutely phenomenal. And going back to the previous slide, when we're talking about reach and awareness, there's never been a platform quite like social media to allow our messages to proliferate quite like this. Now, with the more people that's joining social, it's having a profoundly different impact on how people use it and who uses it. And when we're talking about who uses it, let's look at the demographics. Because typically, we're seeing the age demographics shift to the right-hand side of this chart. And one thing that demonstrates that point perfectly is the fact, if you look at 13 to 19-year-olds, where you've got 6 and 7.1% between male and female, or female and male, respectively, you look at 40 to 49 years old, it's actually bigger. So now 40 to 49-year-olds outnumber 13 to 19-year-olds on social. And if that isn't mass acceptance across demographics and a mass acceptance of social media being a way of life for pretty much most of humanity, I don't know what is. So fundamentally, when we're thinking about social media and we're thinking, are our audience on it or off it? Do we need to use other channels? Yes, we need to use other channels, but social media, absolutely, our audience are there. And our audience is also starting to use the platforms in different ways. So yes, it's growing. Yes, the demographics are changing, but also people are using more platforms. Now, the average amount of platforms that people use worldwide, as you can see highlighted in white here, is 7.5. And what that actually means, this is a very numerical chart, but it's actually one of my favorites, because what that means is that users are across multiple platforms. So now we as businesses can consider multiple channels and reaching our audience through multiple channels to maximize that reach and maximize that awareness that we were talking about. Because let's take LinkedIn, for example. Across every social media platform, as you can see here, there is less than 1% that's unique to the platform. So that means users are across multiple. And let's say if we were leading on a LinkedIn first strategy, which would be par for the course if you're a B2B business. But typically, if you're a B2B business, you would go, right, I'm going to use LinkedIn. I'm also going to use Twitter. But actually, looking at this data, you realize that 87.8% of the LinkedIn user base is also on Facebook, 83% basically on WhatsApp, another 83% on Instagram, nearly 50% on TikTok. So you wouldn't typically consider those platforms from a B2B perspective, but the audience are absolutely there. So that opens up our opportunity to increase our distribution. We just now need to think about what platforms we're going to focus on, of which we're going to come to later. And that's where the organic social benchmarks come into it, right? So we got some kind of core pillars and some fundamentals of social media marketing. We've seen the landscape today, and the opportunity is increasing for businesses, irrespective of category, right? Because the demographics are becoming increasingly broad. Then if we look at organic social benchmarks, we can start to think about what formats could we potentially use? What tactics can we apply to help maximize our reach? Because like I said earlier, organic reach is always going to be diminishing, but there are ways that we can address that. And when I say organic reach is always diminishing, typically organic reach of single image posts in the feed are the ones that's diminishing the most. And that's typically what most businesses use when they're posting social media content. They'll post a single image with a bit of caption to Insta and Facebook. Time is moving and platforms and formats are changing with it. So in this example, Facebook Live, look at the amount of interactions by average per post. It is fundamentally different in terms of how much interaction you'll get from a Facebook Live. The reason for this is because the platforms will prioritize different formats and features depending on their own goals as an organization. And for that reason, because we're all trying to hook our business into Facebook's or any social media platform, that's why it's ever changing. Because if Facebook's goals change, then our tactics need to move to address that. You notice I said our tactics change, our fundamental strategies, our guiding beliefs won't change. But we do have some tactics at our disposal to maximize our reach. Live video being one of those, and also carousels on Instagram being another important one. These are opportunities that we can use to apply to our social content to give us the best chance of getting our content into as many feeds as possible. And when we get it into as many feeds as possible, of course, our job is to try and generate as much engagement as possible. Now, there's an intersection between how we drive engagement. It's about using the right format, which will get us as far as wide, and using the right creative, which ultimately will encourage that form of interaction. If we go back to those 6 pillars we started with, fundamentally, it's our job to be encouraging audience participation. Like I said, whether it's through polls, whether it's through encouraging people to tag others or comment on a question that you might have, or do something more in depth, be it like reply with a video or reply with, a duet or remix or whatever it might be. So of course, the intersection of that, of format plus channel, but the intersection of that and the creative as well, that will then help us maximize our engagement rate. And what we've got in front of the screen is the current average engagement rates. And this is where we need to start thinking about how we utilize different channels to maximize our chances of success. Clearly, if we have a Facebook first strategy, we know that our impact that we're going to be able to create with that is ever diminishing, and it is by orders of magnitude lower than that of Instagram and TikTok. So we need to be open-minded to think about, right, if our audience are changing, the landscape of social media is changing, platforms are becoming increasingly diverse in terms of their demographic. We're seeing users use more platforms than ever before. We shouldn't disregard TikTok as an example, right? If we're a B2B business, because if we looked at that LinkedIn example that we shared earlier, 50% of the LinkedIn user base are also on TikTok. TikTok gives us, at least 3 to 4 times the engagement, or 3 times the engagement rather, that we get on Instagram alone, and orders of magnitude bigger than it is on Facebook. So that's why we need to think about bringing other different channels into the mix to ensure that we maximize our reach and optimize for our engagement. Because the more engagement we get on our content, the further our content goes, the more our awareness grows, the more our brand grows, the more we maximize mental availability, being the first brand that comes to mind when people have a problem. The lesson behind or underneath all of this is to think like a scientist. There's a fundamental difference between how scientists and how most marketers think. And the difference is this: a scientist comes up with a hypothesis, then works to disprove that hypothesis. Disproving a hypothesis is a win. That is a learning. We now know this cause and this effect is not linked. So we go ahead and create another hypothesis or find more experiments to disprove them. That's a scientist. You look at a marketer, they work in the reverse. And I've been there too. So I'm speaking from experience, is that we think in the opposite way. We think, right, we've got a hypothesis, but I'm going to work to try and prove that. Whenever you work to prove something, that opens up confirmation bias. And I'm sure we've all been there, whereby it's very easy to find some data or article online to support your viewpoint. And when we are subjected to confirmation bias, our learning diminishes, because then we start to link the outcome of something, whether we were right or wrong, we link that to an ego. And that's the thing. We need to think like a scientist, which means curiosity, which means governing by these principles that we started with, which means running experiments, trying carousels, trying live video, trying TikTok, and figuring out what worked for me, what didn't work, more importantly. Because if something didn't work, that's not a failure, that's a learning. And that's a really important distinction to make. We just need to not think about this from a, am I right or wrong, and link the result and the outcome to our own personal worth. We need to be unemotional with it. Factually, did it work or did it not? Is it helping us get closer to our 6 fundamental truths that we spoke about? Is it helping our word of mouth grow? Is it helping drive more awareness or reach, etc.? If it's not, great, we've experimented and we can move on. That is thinking like a scientist. Scientists also will use data to inform a strategy. They're not going to just use their guts. Fundamentally, we need to be objective with this. So there's 6 tips to become more data-driven, starting with using hashtags wisely. If we want to create impact and if we want to drive reach, hashtags, as we know, are a really important thing to use. This is one of my favorite tools to find relevant hashtags, besthashtags.com. There's lots of other hashtags tools, but this is free and I'm cheap. So this is one I'm recommending. Just to clear this up as well, because it's a very common question, hashtags are only worthwhile using on Twitter, on Instagram, and on TikTok. Any other platform, they don't carry the same weight. I've yet to see any objective data to tell me that hashtags are worth anything or worth considering at all on Facebook or on LinkedIn. So just 3 platforms to think about hashtags on. And in terms of the volumes, what we typically see, 20 hashtags on Instagram, 3 hashtags on Twitter. And in terms of TikTok, I honestly don't know, because there's still a lot of, I haven't seen any data basically. So hashtags and using them wisely. Linking into that as well, using hashtags wisely, thinking about days of the year as well. So days of the year, really useful website for looking at whatever national day is upcoming. This will tell you all the associated hashtags behind a national day. Of course, don't shoehorn your business into something that is not applicable. But if it's International Women's Day, if it's, World Book Day, for example, both of which were recent, that gives you an opportunity to know that those hashtags will trend. So get in front of that with some content that talks to that point, provided you have some good stories to share and relevant stories. Follow trusted sources. So this is great for LinkedIn, or not just LinkedIn, but just for any of your social strategy. Follow those people in the industry that you can rely on, people that are committed to providing really good, fundamental, scientific-based information. A perfect example is John Asperian. Definitely follow him on LinkedIn. I have a lot of time for John. He is committed to open and transparent experiments that he's running on his LinkedIn profile. Things change all the time. So you want to find people like this, like John, and what we're just seeing on this very wordy slide is one of his experiments when he was running some experiments on LinkedIn stories. He's fantastically generous in what he shares. So finding people like John that actually show the detail behind their conclusion, rather than just saying, don't do stories are rubbish. He actually gives some evidence behind that. And that's what we want to do. And that's why, I started with that whole kind of social media myth busting. We want to get away from, lazy just assumptions of say we should do this or do that, or that doesn't work or that does. We need to be curious, and we need to follow people that are committed to that level of transparency. 3, use impressions as your lead indicator. Impressions is such an important metric because essentially it's going to tell you the impact you're making with your content. It's telling you how far and wide it's going. I'm showing a screenshot of Content Cal here, but there are lots of different analytics tools that will give you this data. I like impressions as a metric because it's consistent across all social platforms. You can use it both organic and on paid. It really helps you understand how far your content is going. Because as we said, our job is to try and get our content as far and as wide as possible. And a key way of doing that is increasing our engagement. Now, Google Analytics will help us understand the impact of all of these impressions. We're going further and wider with our content than ever before, hopefully. And that will then mean that what's the impact that it's having for our business? So simply a nice way to gauge that is just looking at site traffic sent across these different social platforms. This will help you understand the impact of all of that impressions, all of those impressions. As you can see here, I've also called this reach. Reach and impressions are a very similar metric, just so you know the difference. Impressions is the count of the amount of times your content's been seen, and it might have been seen duplicate times or multiple times by the same person. Reach is the unique metric, which only counts as those individual views, so it's unique views. Now, the reason I like impressions more than reach typically when I'm looking at social is because you can't get reliable reach data from LinkedIn and Twitter. So actually impressions is the only metric of its kind that's consistent across all the other platforms. So, and because it's me, I like to simplify things as much as possible. Impressions really does the job as far as I'm concerned. And that is a key metric to think about. And as you can see throughout all of this, we're not talking about like massive spreadsheets you need to make, reams of different data points you need to track. Really, we're only tracking maybe 3 metrics, I would say, and the other 2 are about to come up. Here's one of them, engagement rate. Engagement rate is a really important one. We've already spoken about engagement rate in the context of the platforms that are delivering great engagement rate, like TikTok versus Instagram, for example. But I like to see engagement rate as like a good guide to content quality. Because sometimes we might look at our top performing posts and go, oh, that one got 200 likes, 300 likes or whatever. And you think this is the best. But yes, there is some truth in that. But actually, sometimes it pays to dig into that a little bit, because what engagement rate does, it kind of creates a really nice level playing field, because engagement rate helps you understand the amount of interactions you've had per every 100 people that you've reached. And why that's important is because let's just say your content, a piece of content didn't go very far, only got shown to 100 people, but maybe out of those 100 people, 50 of them interacted with it. It's got a 50% engagement rate. That's a fantastic sign to us that, maybe it didn't perform better than our post with 200 likes, but actually it's a hidden gem. It's something that if we could get to go further, we know that people have a higher propensity to engage with it. So then we want to be able to take content like that, see it as top performing, and then kind of reuse that later on and repurpose that content. And here, when we're saying think like a scientist and be curious, look at the content that's worked well for you, just not in terms of most engagement, but also engagement rate. And look at what was that content? What was the theme? What was the topic? What platform did we post it on? What time did we post it? What format did we post it in? All of that will give you a real kind of rich picture of the content that will resonate with your audience. And it's our job to learn from that, thinking like a scientist again, learn from that and reuse that content into our next content plan for next week or next month. And there we go, just as a reminder, engagement rate, interactions divided by reach times 100. So simple calculation, but ultimately gives us the likelihood and likeliness of someone to engage with our content. So see it as your content quality score. And point 6 to becoming data-driven, follow competitors closely. And this is some data that I saw that I had to chuckle at, because typically this is what social media marketers, in a survey that was run by Social Media Examiner, this is what marketers typically said. How do they learn about social media marketing? 70% trial and error. What a waste of time that is, because fundamentally so much has been learned already, and your competitors have learned from it and then done it again already and improved it. Why don't we look at our competitors first? Why are we trying to make the same mistakes first? Because if someone's made a mistake already, I want to learn from that and then build on it. So that's why we should follow competitors closely. So this is an example of what we've got on Content Cal's analytics, but you could easily chart this just by looking at your own competitors, looking at their social channels. I like to look at them against engagement rate, because that helps us understand how, benchmark ourselves. What kind of engagement rate are we getting relative to our competitors? But we can also look at them really closely. And this is where we kind of ramp up the nosy. And we can really see exactly what content is driving growth for our competitors. What are the things that are driving those interactions, those impressions, driving the engagement? Because we want to learn from that. And whilst I don't advocate plagiary, I absolutely advocate stealing like an artist. And stealing like an artist means that in the world of anything creative, be it content marketing, art, music, nothing is truly original. It is all a derivation of something else. And sometimes as marketers, we put ourselves under immense pressure to come up with something new, creative. Nothing's new. It is all a connection of different things together. So all really creativity, a better word for creativity is connectivity. And how we connect one idea to another is where creativity happens. So connect, for example, connecting something that's worked well for your competitors with your own take and your own mindset of it, that is creativity. So stealing like an artist. How can we learn from what our competitors have done, learn from all of their errors and their mistakes and their analysis, and how can we build on that? But the metric that matters above all else is this one. It's share of voice. Fundamentally, going right back to the principles that we started with, our job is to encourage word of mouth at scale. We want to get people talking about us. Nothing else. If we could strip away those other 5 metrics, because that would be left with still the most important one. Getting more people talking about us, I think we can all agree, is the most important thing we need to do. And social media is the best channel to get that happening. So share of voice is well known in consumer marketing. So if you were in the marketing team and the brand team of Unilever or Procter & Gamble or someone like that, this is child's play to them. This is what they do every day. But for some reason in social media, this isn't that widely known and not everyone speaks about it. Fundamentally, if you're not reaching more customers than you have, you cannot grow. Your share of voice needs to be above your market share. If you're a small business, that's not going to be too much of a problem. If you're a big business, you absolutely need to be all over this. Because if more people aren't talking about you than how big your market is, your brand will shrink over time. And that is the truly impactful area of social media really represented in one single chart. Getting people to talk about us grows our brands. So that is share of voice, but how do you calculate it for yourself? And this is where you can use tools like mentionlytics.com. And the best thing you can do is pop in yourself versus your competitors, and then you can look at the amount of conversation around your brand. And what share of voice is and what these like metrics relate to, simply it's the amount of times that your brand name is mentioned, both tagged and untagged, across social and across the wider internet. The more people talking about you, the more your brand grows, the more your reach grows. The more your reach grows, the more awareness grows, the more you maximize mental availability, the more you become the first brand that comes to mind when a customer has a problem. So this links intrinsically back into those principles that we started with. And here is where the kind of compounding impact of social media happens. And this is why, it's why I love social media. It's why I love like how brands can leverage it properly, because the more mentions you get, the more reach you get. The way to get more mentions is through collaborating with others, as we said in the kind of second tier of our kind of first principles mindset. Because here, what we're looking at, just, we're a small brand here at Content Cal with a marketing team of 5 people. Fundamentally, we're reaching in one single month, 560,000 people. And that's because other people are talking about us. So we need to light a fire of word of mouth by collaborating with others, creating content together, getting content in other people's feeds, creating content on different formats that are growing, like, lives, like carousels, on platforms that are growing, like Instagram still, and TikTok, for example, creating across multiple platforms because we know our audience are in multiple places. All of that increases our reach. Encouraging audience participation increases our engagement. Increasing our engagement increases our share of voice. When our share of voice grows, so does our brand, and so does the wider awareness and reach of our content. We don't need to obsess with so many metrics, really. We have spoken about 6 golden rules and 3 metrics: impressions, share of voice, and engagement rate. That is all we need to do to truly demonstrate the impact that social media can create. And let's finish here. But what about ROI? Because, despite all of my excitement around how compelling social media is and how we don't need to become data scientists to analyze the impact, we still have that challenge of saying, well, how much money does it bring in? Because we've still got to fight that battle of some of the kind of legacy businesses that are fixated on short-term results. And of course, we all have to keep the lights on the business. So we do need to bring in short-term revenues. But here's how we did it at Content Cal. We've got 5 key content assets: our blogs, our webinars, our guides, and our strategy sessions, which are kind of like drop-ins, similar to what we're doing right now, all underpinned in our academy, which puts it into a structured learning journey. Everything that we create is all about education, right? That is our if you had to strip down our content strategy into one word, it's education. Okay, keeps it nice and simple, right? Our job is to build trust with an audience through education. We do it through 5 assets. Those 5 assets then are pretty much everything that we promote on social are related to, or is related rather, to these 5 assets. So that is our whole content strategy and our social media strategy basically on one single slide. Now, because this is all about driving people to register for these, to download these, whatever, right? All on social. Because it's all about that, it makes it really easy to track, because suddenly, right, because we use HubSpot. HubSpot's a CRM system, which is useful for tracking, but there's a million other tools like HubSpot too. HubSpot allows us to see everyone and all of the impact that's happening, because social media is our main promotional channel for all of our content assets. Our content assets and every download of one of those, a registration goes into HubSpot. So we could see prospect A has downloaded this, has watched this, has been part of this. We can see a funnel emerging. We can see the amount of interaction they've had in their content. And then as a result, we can also see how many of those that have visited a webinar, joined one of the strategy sessions, been to the academy, how many of those have progressed into becoming an opportunity, been in a kind of a sales process? How many have become customers? What's the average sales value of those customers? Because then we can see what the revenue is per asset type. And then what we can simply do is it's pretty simple maths here, because HubSpot tells us this. What's our conversion rate by asset type? So if someone came in from a webinar first, what's the likelihood of people to convert? 8%. What's their average sales price that they spend with us? 821 quid. And then that just makes it really easy for us to understand that based on that economics, then if we know that all we do is just do 8% of 821 quid, and that becomes the economic value of every new contact that we generate through a webinar. Because simply we know that 8% of them convert, and when they do convert, they'll typically spend £821. And with that, it becomes really easy then to say, right, every single webinar subscriber is worth £69 to us. So that then helps leverage investment and further investment in like paid media, etc. And it helps justify all of this work to the investors, to senior leadership team, because now they can see the economic value rather than just saying, oh, how many registrations did we get? We've got a nominal value and a potential forward pipeline emerging here, but all because everything that we've done has been tracked in a CRM. But it's worthwhile saying, just as we're closing out here, don't expect meaningful results in less than 3 months. Things take time to work. Things take time to grow ultimately. So make sure you've got the space to let that breathe and a space to drive those insights. And let's finish off with a bit of a recap. Think like a scientist. Fundamentally, come up with hypotheses, run experiments, and see a win in disproving those hypotheses. You can learn and move forward. Thinking first principles, those 6 principles we started with are your kind of underlying pillars that drive social. Understand the importance of reach and impressions, knowing what impact means, because the more people that we can get content into the feeds of, the more our share of voice will grow. And then we need to optimize for engagement rate. We spoke about lots of ways of doing that, encouraging audience participation, using different formats and channels, stealing like an artist, looking at our competitors, looking at what's worked for them, and then repurposing that to us. Thinking about the power of non-owned channels, like we looked at in share of voice, looking at those others that we can collaborate with to get our content in other people's feeds, a fantastic way of increasing that share of voice, increasing our awareness. And then just set up a structure to report on ROI. Whatever the kind of outcome is for you, just set up a simple structure that will allow you to report on it in the same way that we've just shown. And with that, thank you so much for your time. Any questions, there is my Twitter handle, which you can catch me at, or just follow me on LinkedIn, where I'm probably more likely to engage and contact. But otherwise, I hope you've enjoyed it. I'll speak to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.